Every Friday, a stranger transferred $5,000 to me for 8 years. I never knew who the sender was. But one day, the police knocked on my door. "Ma'am, the sender is asking to meet you. You are his daughter." When I found out... Good day, dear listeners. It's Anna again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. The old wallet was buried under a stack of Christmas cards, 2 expired coupons, and a single bobby pin at the bottom of my junk drawer. I wasn't even looking for it. I was looking for a rubber band. That's the ridiculous truth of how everything began. With a rubber band I never found. My name is Karen Miller. I was 47 years old, recently divorced, working as a school librarian in Columbus, Ohio, and living in a rented 2-bedroom apartment that smelled faintly of the previous tenant's cigarettes, no matter how many candles I burned. My life was quiet in the way that a healing wound is quiet. Not peaceful, exactly, but still. After 14 years of marriage to Derek Miller, after the fights and the silences and the long, slow unraveling, I had learned to appreciate still. The apartment was small, but mine. I had my bookshelves organized by genre, my coffee maker that I'd bought with my own paycheck, my daughter Sophie's photographs arranged on the windowsill, Sophie at 5, Sophie at 12, Sophie at her college graduation, beaming in that yellow dress. I had my routines. Up at 6:15, coffee before the news, the short drive to Hartwell Elementary, where the children still ran to greet me on Monday mornings, like I was something worth running toward. It wasn't the life I'd imagined when I was 23, and Derek had slid a ring onto my finger in a parking lot outside Applebee's. But it was mine. The divorce had been finalized 11 months earlier. We had divided the house, the savings, the furniture, and 14 years of accumulated resentment with the cold efficiency of people who have already stopped caring enough to fight. Derek kept the house. I kept the car, my retirement account, and a quiet rage I was slowly learning to put down, like a bag that had grown too heavy to carry. I had moved on. That's what I told myself when Sophie called on Sunday evenings. That's what I told my friend Rachel when she asked how I was doing over glasses of wine at her kitchen table. I had moved on. I was fine. And most days, I almost believed it. The junk drawer was a disaster, the way junk drawers always are. A small, honest autobiography of a person's life. There were batteries of unknown charge, a takeout menu from a restaurant that had closed 2 years ago, a keychain with no key, and the old wallet. It was brown leather, cracked at the fold, and I hadn't seen it in at least 2 years. I'd replaced it after I found the newer one at a craft fair. This one had just drifted to the bottom of things. I pulled it out and unzipped it more out of habit than curiosity. Inside, a Starbucks loyalty card with maybe 2 punches left, a grocery store receipt so faded it was unreadable, and tucked into the small side pocket where I used to keep business cards. A lottery ticket, a Powerball ticket, creased, slightly soft along the edges, dated 2 years and 3 months ago. I almost threw it away. I held it over the kitchen trash can for a full 2 seconds. The ticket pinched between my fingers, already leaning toward letting go. Why would I check it? It was 2 years old. The odds of winning the lottery were 1 in 300 million. I bought exactly 1 ticket that day. I remembered it vaguely, a Tuesday, stopping at the BP station on Morse Road for gas, deciding on a whim to spend $1. $1, 1 ticket. I had forgotten about it by the time I got home, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the librarian in me, the part that couldn't leave a thing unexamined. Maybe it was just boredom on a Sunday afternoon. I sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop and typed the Powerball website address. I I checked the numbers once, then I checked them again. Then I sat very still for a very long time. The numbers matched, all 6 of them, every single one. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't knock anything over. I simply sat at my kitchen table in my apartment that smelled like someone else's cigarettes and stared at my laptop screen until the screensaver came on. And then I picked up my phone. The Ohio Lottery customer service line rang 3 times before a man answered. His name, he said, was Gary. He had the practiced warmth of someone who took these calls often and expected nothing unusual. I read him the ticket numbers. There was a pause. Not the kind of pause that means the person is thinking. The kind of pause that means the person has stopped breathing. "Ma'am," he said finally, and his voice was different now. Quieter, careful, like he was choosing each word off a shelf. "I'm going to need you to hold for just 1 moment." He put me on hold. A cheerful jingle played. I looked out my window at the parking lot below, at Mrs. Hendricks from 4B loading groceries into her hatchback, at a sparrow on the telephone wire, at my own reflection in the dark glass. Gary came back on the line 4 minutes later. "Mrs. Miller," he said. And he used Mrs. even though I had said Miss when I introduced myself. "The ticket you've described, if it is genuine and in the condition required by Ohio lottery regulations, you may be looking at a prize of $91 million. The sparrow flew away. Mrs. Hendricks closed her trunk. The world kept moving. I did not. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in my bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the building settle around me, the pipes, the neighbor's television, the occasional car in the lot below, and I thought about the number. $91 million. I said it in my head the way you might say a word in a foreign language you don't speak yet, turning it over, trying to feel the shape of it. $91 million. It didn't feel real. It felt like a premise for a story, not a fact of my actual life. By 2 a.m, reality had begun to seep in through the edges. Not the good part of reality. The champagne and the relief and Sophie's face when I told her. The other part. The part that arrives uninvited and sits down at your table without asking. The part that sounds exactly like Derek's voice. I sat up in the dark and reached for my phone. I went to the Ohio divorce decree document I kept in my Google Drive. I had kept every legal document from the divorce, organized in a folder I had named, with grim humor, the rest of my life. I opened it and scrolled to the section on marital property. And then I opened my calendar app and found the date I was looking for. The ticket was purchased on a Tuesday in September. The divorce petition had been filed, by Derek, notably, not by me, in November of that same year, 2 months later, which meant that on the day I stopped at the BP station on Morse Road and spent $1 on a whim, Derek and I were still, technically, legally, married. I set my phone down on the nightstand and sat in the dark for a long time. Would he know? How would he know? I hadn't told anyone. I had spoken only to Gary at the lottery office, and Gary had given me a case number and the address of the Ohio Lottery headquarters, and told me to bring the original ticket and 2 forms of government-issued identification. He had not asked for my marital status. He had not asked about my divorce. There was no reason, I told myself, for Derek to find out. But Derek had a way of finding things out. In 14 years of marriage, I had come to understand that Derek Miller was not a particularly intelligent man, but he was a watchful one. He noticed things, small things, the kinds of things most people overlook. He had noticed, before I said a word about it, the afternoon I'd had lunch with a friend he didn't like. He had noticed the month I started putting a little extra into my personal savings account. He had a talent for surveillance that was not born of love but of suspicion, and I had spent years living inside that gaze without fully realizing what it was. Now, sitting in my dark bedroom with a lottery ticket worth $91 million in the pocket of yesterday's jeans, I felt that gaze again. Theoretical, yes. He didn't know. He couldn't know. But he might find out. And if he did, I forced myself to stop. I forced myself to breathe. I was not going to make decisions out of panic. I had spent 14 years making decisions out of panic, or out of avoidance, or out of the exhausted need to keep the peace. I was not going to do that anymore. I was going to think. The ticket was in my wallet. My wallet. I had bought it with cash I had taken from my own purse, from a $20 bill I had gotten as change from the grocery store. There was no record anywhere of a shared purchase. No joint account transaction, no check, no credit card. Cash. $1. My dollar. But my dollar and marital property are not always the same thing in the eyes of Ohio family law. I knew this not because I was a lawyer, but because I had sat across a conference table from one for 8 months during my divorce and absorbed more legal language than I had ever wanted to know. In Ohio, property acquired during a marriage, including lottery winnings, could be subject to equitable distribution, depending on the circumstances, depending on how a clever attorney argued it. And Derek's girlfriend, Claudia Reeves, was a real estate attorney. They had been together for 8 months. He had introduced her to Sophie at Thanksgiving, and Sophie had called me afterward and said, carefully, that she seemed very competent. I had translated that as, she is smart, and I didn't like her. I had filed that information away and tried not to think about it. Now I thought about it. I got out of bed at 4 in the morning and went to the kitchen and made coffee and sat down at the table where, 12 hours earlier, I had checked those numbers for the second time. I took a legal pad from the drawer, the good drawer, not the junk drawer, and I wrote at the top, what I know, what I need to do. The first thing I wrote was, tell no one. The second was, find a lawyer, not the same one from the divorce, someone who specializes in lottery and asset protection. The third was, do not go to the lottery office yet, not until I understand where I stand. I stared at the list. Outside, the sky was beginning to lighten at the edges, that particular gray-blue of early October mornings in Ohio. A dog barked somewhere in the complex. A car started. I picked up my pen and added a 4th line. Document everything. The date of purchase, the cash, the wallet, all of it. I sat back and looked at what I had written. It was not a plan, not yet. It was the skeleton of one. But for the first time since I had dialed the lottery's number, I did not feel like a woman things were happening to. I felt like a woman who was about to make something happen. That was the moment, I think, when I decided not to be careful, not to survive this, to win it. The law offices of Patricia Howe were on the 14th floor of a building downtown that smelled like recycled air and ambition. I had found her name through a legal directory specializing in financial litigation and asset protection. Her bio said she had handled 17 lottery-related inheritance and divorce disputes in the past decade. I had called from a payphone, an actual payphone, outside a Walgreens, the kind I wasn't sure still existed, because I didn't want the call in my phone records. Patricia Howe was a small, precise woman in her late 50s who wore her gray hair short and her expression shorter. She listened to everything I said without interrupting, which is rarer than it sounds. I laid it out for her in the order I had rehearsed on the drive over. The ticket, the date, the cash purchase, the divorce timeline, Claudia Reeves. When I finished, she set down her pen and looked at me for a moment. The good news, she said, is that you have a defensible position. The ticket was purchased with cash. That's important. It wasn't a check from a joint account. It wasn't a credit card. Cash transactions leave no automatic trail to a shared financial life. And the bad news? The bad news is that Ohio is an equitable distribution state. If Derek's attorney, and you're right to be concerned that it's Claudia Reeves specifically, can argue that any of the cash you used came from marital funds or that the purchase was part of a pattern of joint spending, they can make a credible claim. She paused. The ticket was bought during the marriage. That's the fact they'll anchor everything to. I looked out her window at the Columbus skyline, at the thin October light on the buildings. What do I need? Evidence, she said simply. You need to build a paper trail backward. Bank statements showing that the cash you used came from your individual income, not a joint account. Receipts, if they exist. The gas station. Do you remember which one? BP on Morse Road. Good. Security footage is gone after 2 years, but receipts, loyalty card data, point-of-sale records, some of those may still exist. Do you have a BP gas rewards card? I thought for a moment. Yes, I've had it for years. Patricia smiled for the first time. It was a small, professional smile, but it was real. Pull your account history. If your fuel purchase from that date is in the records, it places you at that station with your personal card, combined with a bank statement showing you withdrew cash around that time. I did, I said, remembering. I stopped at the ATM at my credit union that same day. I remember because the machine was out of tens and gave me all fives. Get that ATM record. She leaned forward. Karen, I want to be honest with you. This is going to be a fight if Derek finds out. Claudia Reeves is good. I've seen her work. She will find every weak seam and press on it. But if we can establish a clean chain of evidence showing this was a personal, individual purchase made with individual funds, we can win this. I nodded slowly. Win. That word again. I retained Patricia Howe that afternoon, writing a check from my personal account for the retainer with a hand that was remarkably steady. On the drive home, I stopped at my credit union and requested 6 months of ATM and account records. I pulled up my BP rewards account on my phone at a red light and found the transaction history. And there it was, September 14th, a fuel purchase of $34.17 at the Morse Road station at 6:52 p.m. My heart rate did something complicated. I had been there. The record proved I had been there, and my ATM withdrawal of $60 and $5 bills was dated the same day, 3:40 p.m. I was so absorbed in the relief of it that I almost didn't notice the text from Sophie when I got home. Hey, Mom. Weird question. Dad called me today asking if you'd come into any money lately. His words. Did something happen? I sat in my car in the parking lot and read the text twice. Then I read it a third time. My hands tightened on the phone. Derek was asking questions. Somehow, through whom, through what channel, I didn't know, he had caught the scent of something. Had Gary from the lottery line said something to someone? Had I been seen going into Patricia Howe's building by someone who knew Derek? Columbus was not a small town, but it was full of overlapping circles, the kind of social geography where information traveled faster than you expected. I typed back to Sophie carefully, "No, nothing major. Your dad is just being your dad. I'll tell you more soon. I love you." Then I went inside and photographed every piece of evidence I had. The ATM receipt, the BP app transaction, the lottery ticket itself, sealed in a plastic bag now, handled with cotton gloves on the advice of Patricia Howe, stored in the fireproof lockbox I had bought at Home Depot. And I sent the photographs to a secure cloud account. The point of no return, I realized, was not the moment I found the ticket. It wasn't even the moment I called Gary. It was this moment, sitting at my kitchen table, watching the dots on Sophie's text app come and go, knowing that somewhere across Columbus, Derek Miller was already moving. And so was I. Patricia filed the formal claim on a Thursday morning in October, 3 weeks after our first meeting. I presented myself at the Ohio Lottery Commission headquarters on Front Street with the ticket, authenticated by Patricia's own document specialist, my 2 forms of ID, and a folder of supporting evidence so thorough it made the lottery's intake officer blink twice when I slid it across the desk. "You came prepared," he said. "I always do," I said, which wasn't true, but I was learning. The Lottery Commission confirmed the ticket's validity that afternoon. $91 million pre-tax. The lump sum option, which Patricia had already advised me to take, came to approximately $54 million after federal and state taxes. Still a number so large it didn't fit cleanly in my mind. I kept trying to hold it and it kept slipping, like trying to carry water in your hands. Patricia had advised me that once the claim was officially filed, it would become a matter of public record within 10 to 14 business days. We had that window. We used it. She drafted an asset protection structure, a trust, specific accounts, documentation that would, in the event of a legal challenge, clearly demonstrate the ticket's origins as individual property. We were on day 9 when Derek called me directly. I hadn't heard his voice in 4 months. It was the same voice, pleasant, measured, with that slight flatness underneath it that I had once mistaken for calm and later understood was control. "Karen," he said, "I think we need to talk." "About what, Derek?" A pause. "I think you know." I was standing in my kitchen. I looked at the sparrow on the wire outside my window, or maybe a different sparrow, I could never tell, and I felt my heartbeat in my throat. "I don't know what you're referring to," I said evenly. "If you have something specific to say, say it." He exhaled. "Claudia is going to be reaching out to Patricia Howe's office. We filed a motion to contest the claim." There it was, out in the open, hard and bright as a coin on a table. I had known it was coming. Patricia had told me it would come. Knowing didn't make it easier. My free hand, resting on the counter, pressed flat against the tile. "That's between your attorneys and mine," I said. "Don't call me again about this." I hung up. 36 hours later, the motion arrived. Derek Miller versus Ohio Lottery Commission and Karen Miller, claiming that the winning ticket constituted marital property acquired during the legal marriage of Karen and Derek Miller, and requesting an injunction blocking distribution of the prize until the matter was resolved by the court. Patricia and I met that evening at her office. She read the filing with the quiet attention of a surgeon reviewing imaging results. "It's well constructed," she said, which I suspected was her version of, "This is going to be hard." Claudia knows what she's doing. She's framed it around the presumption of marital community. The argument is that all assets acquired during a marriage, absent explicit prenuptial agreement, excluding personal windfalls, are subject to equitable review. Can she win with that? In front of the wrong judge, possibly. Patricia set the papers down. "But we have the ATM record, the BP transaction, and a paper trail showing that the cash used was your individual income from your paycheck 2 days prior. Our position is solid." The preliminary hearing was set for 3 weeks out. In the meantime, Derek and Claudia escalated. Claudia called Sophie, which I learned from Sophie, who was furious and confused, and told her that her mother had hidden a significant asset during divorce proceedings, and that this was a legal and ethical issue that affects the whole family. Sophie texted me in all caps. She was 22 and sharp, and she loved me, and they had gone after her like she was leverage, which is exactly what she was to them. I met Sophie for dinner that Friday at the Italian place near her apartment. I told her everything. I watched her face move through shock, disbelief, anger, and something that looked, at the end, like fierce, quiet pride. "They called me to pressure you," she said flatly. "Yes, that's disgusting." She stabbed a piece of pasta. "What do you need me to do?" "Nothing. Stay out of it. Let me handle it." She looked at me for a long moment. "You're going to win, aren't you?" It wasn't a question. The preliminary hearing lasted 40 minutes. The judge, a quiet, meticulous woman named the Honorable Sandra Breck, reviewed the initial filings and denied Claudia's request for an emergency injunction blocking distribution. It wasn't a victory exactly. It was a stay of battle. But it meant the money was not frozen. It meant I still had time. After the hearing, I drove home and did not go anywhere for 3 days. I took sick leave from the library. I wore the same sweater for 2 days in a row. I ate soup and watched old episodes of Frasier and let my nervous system do whatever it needed to do. I had been braced for a fight for weeks. I needed, just briefly, to put the armor down. On the third morning, I woke up at 6:15, made my coffee, and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time settle into my chest like a warm stone. I was ready. The call came on a Tuesday through Sophie, which was exactly how I expected it to come. Derek had learned, I suspected, that direct confrontation was not working. The motion was filed, the legal machinery was turning, but he couldn't control the outcome from inside a courtroom. Not yet. And the waiting was making him restless. So he tried a different door. Sophie called me that evening, and I could hear the careful neutrality in her voice, the tone she used when she was trying to convey information without editorializing. "Dad wants to know if you'd be open to a settlement conversation," she said, "outside the court. He says Claudia thinks there's a number that could make this whole thing go away." I was sitting in my reading chair by the window, a novel open on my lap that I had not actually been reading. I turned it face down. "What kind of number?" He mentioned he thought maybe 30% of the pre-tax amount. Sophie paused. "Mom, that's... I know what 30% of 91 million is, Sophie. He's offering it as a goodwill gesture. His words." I looked out the window at the parking lot below. Mrs. Hendricks was out again, walking her small dog in careful circles. Ordinary Tuesday evening, the world having no idea. "Sophie," I said carefully, "I want you to listen to me. This offer is not goodwill. It's a calculation. He and Claudia believe their case is weak, and they're right that it's weak. So they're trying to extract what they can before a judge tells them they get nothing." Silence on the line. "So you're saying no?" "I'm saying that a woman who bought a lottery ticket with her own money on her own Tuesday evening does not owe 30% of it to the man who chose to leave the marriage. Yes, I'm saying no." Sophie exhaled slowly. "Okay," she said, and then, "Good." After I hung up, I sat for a long time in the reading chair. I was aware that the offer had been real money, not nothing. $27 million to make the problem disappear. There would have been people in my position who took that number. Who wouldn't blame them? The stress of litigation, the exposure, the cost. I understood the math of capitulation completely. But I also understood something else. If I gave Derek Miller $27 million that he had no right to, I would be handing him not just money, but a story. The story of a woman who, when pressed, folded, and I was done being that woman. I called Rachel the next morning. Rachel Okafor had been my closest friend for 11 years, since we had ended up in adjacent chairs at a school district professional development seminar and bonded over shared horror at the PowerPoint presentation. She was a fifth-grade teacher, pragmatic and funny, and constitutionally incapable of softening hard truths. She was the right person to call. I told her everything at her kitchen table, over the same table where we'd had wine, and she'd asked how I was doing, and I'd said fine. She listened the way she listened to everything, fully, without fidgeting, her hands wrapped around her mug. When I finished, she said, "You've been carrying this alone for a month." I didn't want to put it on anyone. "Karen." She looked at me steadily. "You need to let people love you. Let me love you. What do you need?" I thought about it genuinely. I need someone who is not a lawyer to tell me I'm not crazy. "You're not crazy." She said it immediately without hesitation. "You bought a ticket. You won. It's yours." I also met that week with a financial consultant named Thomas Aldridge, whom Patricia had recommended. A quiet, organized man who specialized in sudden wealth management and had the soothing affect of someone who had genuinely seen it all. He walked me through the trust structure Patricia had built, reviewed the tax implications, and then spent 20 minutes asking me questions about what I actually wanted my life to look like. No one had asked me that yet, not even Patricia. Thomas sat across a conference table from me and asked what I wanted, and I had to stop and actually think about it. "A house," I said first, "not a mansion. A house with a good kitchen and a yard and no cigarette smell." He wrote it down, which made me like him immediately. "And I want to fund something for school libraries," I said, surprising myself slightly. Title I schools especially. "They never have enough books." He wrote that down, too. "And I want Sophie to be able to stop worrying about her student loans." He nodded. I looked out Thomas's conference room window at the sky. Derek and Claudia were out there somewhere, watching, waiting, planning their next move. But in here, in this room, I was doing something they couldn't see and couldn't touch. I was building the life I wanted to have after this was over. I was deciding it into existence. That, I realized, was its own kind of winning, and I hadn't even gotten to the courthouse yet. They came on a Saturday morning, which felt deliberate. Saturday is softer than a weekday. People are in their weekend selves. Their guard is lower. Their kitchens smell like coffee and toast. I think they calculated that. I saw Derek's car in the lot from my bedroom window at 10:15 and felt the small, cold recognition of it settle in my stomach. He drove a silver BMW now, something he'd gotten after the divorce, a purchase that had required him to refinance the house he'd fought so hard to keep. Claudia's white Range Rover was parked beside it. They buzzed from downstairs. I considered not answering. Then I considered what it would mean if I didn't, the narrative it would create, the she's hiding of it. And I pressed the button. I left the door to my apartment open and went to the kitchen to pour myself a second cup of coffee. By the time they knocked and came in, I was leaning against the counter with the mug in both hands, wearing a cardigan and my reading glasses on my head, looking, I hoped, like a woman who had been interrupted mid-Sunday Times and was mildly inconvenienced by it. Derek looked the way he always looked, tall, neatly dressed, his face arranged in the pleasant open expression he used when he wanted something. He'd always been handsome in a forgettable way, the kind of man who photographed well but left no impression when he left a room. Claudia Reeves was not forgettable. She was 41, dark-haired, with the precise posture of someone who had decided a long time ago that physical presence was a professional tool. She wore a camel coat and no jewelry except small gold earrings. She looked at my apartment with the quick, evaluative glance of someone who does property assessments, and I saw what she saw: small, rented, dated. I watched her recalibrate, settling into the assumption of advantage. "Karen," Derek said warmly, "thank you for letting us up." "I almost didn't," I said pleasantly. "Coffee?" They sat on my couch in my apartment that smelled now of lavender diffuser and old books, and Claudia set a slim leather portfolio on her knee with the casual confidence of someone who wants you to notice it. "We thought a face-to-face conversation might be more productive than going through attorneys," Derek said. He had rehearsed this. I could hear the seams. "We're not here to fight, Karen. We're here because we care about finding a resolution that works for everyone." I looked at him over the rim of my mug. "Everyone," I repeated. "This situation," Claudia took over smoothly, "has the potential to become very public, very drawn out, and very expensive for everyone involved. The legal fees alone, at trial, would be substantial. The press attention, once it fully breaks, will be intrusive." She paused to let that settle. "We have a counter-proposal that we think is genuinely fair." She opened the portfolio. Inside was a document, 3 pages already printed, with tabs for signatures. 40%, she said, of the net post-tax award. That's approximately $21 million. In exchange, Derek withdraws the motion, all litigation ends, and the matter is sealed. I did not look at the document. I looked at Claudia. $21 million was a different number than 30% of pre-tax. It was a smaller number, actually. They had revised down, not up, which told me everything about how their confidence in the case had shifted since the preliminary hearing. They had gone from 30% of $91 million to 40% of $54 million. The math was worse for them than the percentage made it sound. They were retreating and calling it a negotiation. "Karen," Derek said, and his voice shifted. Softer now, the register he used when he was trying to access something personal. "We were married for 14 years. I'm not your enemy. Whatever happened between us, I don't want this to turn into a war." I set my coffee mug down on the counter with a quiet click. "Derek," I said, "I want to make sure I understand the situation clearly. You are sitting in my apartment, on my couch, offering me a portion of money that is entirely mine, in exchange for not continuing a legal challenge that has no merit." I tilted my head slightly. "Is that correct?" Claudia's expression tightened at the edges. "The legal challenge has substantial merit," she said, and now there was a crispness in her voice that hadn't been there before. "Ohio courts have consistently—" "Patricia Howe's analysis differs from yours," I said, "and so does Judge Breck's preliminary reading based on her denial of your injunction request." Silence. Derek looked at Claudia. Claudia looked at me. "If you refuse this offer," Claudia said, "we will pursue the full trial. It will take 18 months minimum. The press will cover every detail, your finances, your history, your choices. All of it will be public record." Was that a threat? It was dressed as a warning, but it was a threat. I felt it land in my chest with a small, cold thud, and then I felt something else. Beneath the cold thud, a heat, a steadiness, the kind that comes not from the absence of fear, but from deciding very clearly that you are more afraid of losing yourself than of losing anything else. "Then we'll see each other in court," I said. They left. Derek went first, and I saw in the set of his shoulders that small, rigid shift, the anger he was containing. Claudia went second, And at the door she paused and looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not quite contempt, not quite admiration, something in between. The door closed. I stood in my kitchen for a long moment. My hands were trembling slightly, which I had not let them do while the visitors were present. I pressed them flat on the counter and breathed. They would come at me with everything now. 18 months of litigation, public record, press coverage. They had put the full weight of it in front of me, and I had said no, and there was no taking that back. But here is what I thought about, standing at my kitchen counter with trembling hands. Every time I had agreed to something to avoid conflict, I had made myself smaller. Smaller and smaller until 14 years were gone, and I was living in a rented apartment that smelled like someone else, and I had let it happen. Never again. I picked up my phone and called Patricia Howe. "They came to the apartment," I said when she answered. 40% post-tax. I declined. A pause. "Good," she said. "We go to trial." "Yes," I said. "We go to trial." The courtroom on the morning of the trial was smaller than I had imagined. Not the grand wood-paneled chambers of television dramas, but a functional, fluorescent-lit room with industrial carpeting and a smell of old paper. Judge Sandra Breck entered at 9:02 a.m., and the room arranged itself around her in the way rooms do when authority enters without announcing itself. I sat at the plaintiff's table with Patricia on my left and a yellow legal pad in front of me on which I had written, at the top in block letters, the date I had bought that ticket, September 14th. I didn't need to write it. I knew it better than my own phone number, but seeing it there, in ink, on paper, made it real in a way that no amount of mental preparation had. Derek and Claudia sat at the respondent's table to our right. Claudia was representing him personally, which Patricia had privately told me was a tactical mistake. Attorneys should not represent people they are emotionally involved with because objectivity requires distance, and Claudia had none. She was too close to the desired outcome. She would push too hard and too personally, and pushing too personally in front of a judge who had spent 30 years reading people for a living was not an advantage. Claudia opened the respondent's case with a concise, polished argument. The ticket was purchased during a legal marriage. Ohio equitable distribution law created a presumption of shared ownership. Absent an explicit prenuptial agreement excluding personal lottery windfalls, the court should apply the standard marital property framework. She was good. I had to grant her that. She was precise and controlled, and she knew the statutes cold. I watched Judge Breck take notes in her small, even handwriting, and I felt the familiar cold weight in my stomach. Then Patricia stood up. "Your Honor," she said, "the respondent's argument rests on a presumption, the presumption of marital community. Our evidence will demonstrate that this presumption is rebutted by clear and specific documentation establishing that the ticket in question was purchased with individual, non-marital funds at a specific time and location on a specific date." She presented the evidence in order. First, my credit union ATM withdrawal of $60 on September 14th at 3:40 p.m. from my individual account, not a joint account, my account, which had been established in my name alone 3 years before the marriage and had never been merged. Second, the BP rewards card transaction at the Morse Road station at 6:52 p.m. the same day, $34.17 in fuel, establishing my presence at the location. Third, the register data Patricia's team had obtained from BP's point-of-sale archive. A subpoena had retrieved the detailed transaction records for that terminal, that date, that time window. The lottery ticket purchase was there, One Powerball ticket, cash transaction, 6:54 p.m. 2 minutes after I paid for my gas. $1, cash. From the 60 I had withdrawn that afternoon. The chain was clean. Every link was documented. The money had come from my account to my hand to the register, and not a cent of it had touched anything joint. Judge Breck examined each exhibit with the deliberate thoroughness of someone who is not going to be rushed. I watched her. I could not read her face. I had never been able to read people the way Derek had, but I had learned in the past few months that you don't need to read a situation if your facts are solid. Solid facts are self-reading. Claudia's cross-examination was where things began to come apart. She challenged the ATM record first, arguing that cash withdrawn from an individual account could still be considered income earned during the marriage and therefore marital property. Judge Breck asked her a clarifying question about the specific Ohio statute she was citing. Claudia answered with Section 3105.171, the equitable distribution provision, and then added a citation to a 2019 appellate case that, she said, supported her interpretation. Patricia was on her feet immediately. The 2019 case Claudia had cited, Harmon versus Harmon, had been decided in favor of the individual account holder, not the contesting spouse. Claudia had cited a precedent that argued against her own position. The room was very quiet for a moment. "Counselor," Judge Breck said, in the tone of a woman who does not raise her voice because she doesn't need to, "are you familiar with the outcome in Harmon?" A pause that lasted exactly 1 second too long. "Your Honor, I believe the relevant portion of Harmon established that cash from a premarital individual account, absent evidence of commingling, retains its individual character. Is that not the holding?" Another pause, shorter this time, but harder. "The respondent's position is that commingling is implied by—" "You have no evidence of commingling," Judge Breck said, not unkindly, simply as a fact. That was the moment. I felt it, not a dramatic crack, but a shift, the way the light changes when a cloud passes. Claudia recovered her composure in approximately 3 seconds, which was professionally impressive, but she had lost something she couldn't get back: the judge's confidence in her command of the case. And then Derek made it worse. He had not been scheduled to speak. Patricia had specifically prepared me for the possibility that Claudia would not call him to testify, because a weak witness is worse than no witness. But Derek, who was a watchful man but not finally a patient one, leaned forward and said something quietly to Claudia, and Claudia shook her head, and he said it again, louder this time. "I want to say something," he said, addressing not Claudia but the judge directly. Judge Breck looked at him over her glasses. "Mr. Miller, you are represented by counsel. If you wish to testify, your attorney—" "She bought that ticket to spite me," he said. His voice was controlled for approximately the first 4 words, and then it wasn't. She knew the divorce was coming, and she bought that ticket with money that was ours, and now she's— "Mr. Miller." Judge Breck's voice had weight now. "You will not speak again unless your attorney has the floor. Is that understood?" The room was utterly still. Claudia put her hand on Derek's arm. Her face was perfectly composed, which was the face of a woman doing very fast internal damage assessment. I looked at Derek. In 14 years, I had watched him lose his temper exactly 7 times, and each time he had looked not powerful, but small, reduced by his own anger to something diminished and transparent. He looked small now. I looked back at my legal pad. September 14th. In block letters, my handwriting. Patricia caught my eye and gave me one small, almost imperceptible nod. We rested our case at 11:43 a.m. Judge Breck issued her ruling 9 days later. I learned this is how it usually works. Judges do not pronounce dramatically from the bench at the end of testimony, the way they do in films. They review the record, they write, and then a document arrives in your attorney's inbox, and that document is the rest of your life. Patricia called me at 8:17 on a Wednesday morning. I was in my kitchen, coffee in hand, coat half on, about to leave for work. I had learned in the past 2 months to keep living my ordinary life, to go to work, to shelve books, to help second graders find stories, because the alternative was to sit in my apartment and be consumed by waiting, and I had decided I was not going to let this consume me. "Karen," Patricia said, "the ruling is in." I put my coffee down. "Judge Breck found entirely in your favor." I sat down on the kitchen floor. I did not plan to sit on the floor. My legs simply decided. The tile was cool through my jeans. I pressed my back against the cabinet and listened. The ruling was 22 pages. Patricia summarized the key findings. The ticket was legally established as individual property, purchased with funds from a premarital individual account that showed no evidence of commingling with marital assets. The respondent's argument had failed to overcome the evidentiary burden. Judge Breck had specifically noted in the written ruling that the 2019 Harmon precedent, cited by respondent's counsel, in fact argued against the respondent's position, and that counsel's misapplication of the citation was notable. That word, notable, in a judicial ruling, I would later learn from Patricia, was approximately as close as a federal judge gets to embarrassing. The motion to contest the lottery claim was dismissed with prejudice, meaning Derek could not refile. The Lottery Commission was cleared to proceed with the prize distribution. And because the respondent's challenge had been found to be without merit, and because Judge Breck had specifically noted the distress and delay caused to the petitioner, Derek was ordered to pay the full legal costs of both parties, his own legal fees, my legal fees, all of it. Patricia told me the number. I asked her to repeat it, not because I hadn't heard, but because I wanted to hear it twice. Derek Miller was going to pay, out of pocket, a sum that represented a significant portion of his annual income. "Is it over?" I asked. I was still on the floor. "It's over," Patricia said. "Congratulations, Karen. The money is yours." I sat on the kitchen floor of my rented apartment for a long time after I hung up. I did not cry immediately. The relief was too large for tears at first. It required a few moments to find its shape. I looked at the baseboards, which needed painting. I looked at the crack in the grout near the dishwasher that I had meant to fix for 8 months. I looked at Sophie's photographs on the windowsill, and then I cried. Quietly, without drama, sitting on my kitchen floor in my coat, holding my phone against my chest. I was $54 million richer than I had been yesterday. But what I felt, sitting there, was not the money. What I felt was the shape of the fight I had just won, the specific, solid satisfaction of having stood my ground when everything in my history had trained me to move. I had not folded, not at Derek's phone call, not at the Saturday morning visit, not at the document with the signature tabs. I had stayed exactly where I was. I called Sophie next. She answered on the first ring. "Mom?" "We won," I said. She made a sound I had never heard her make before. Half laugh, half cry, high and involuntary, like a pressure valve releasing. Then she said, in the voice of a 22-year-old trying very hard to sound composed, "Of course you did. Come to dinner Friday. I'm cooking." "Are you going to cook with money now?" I laughed. It came out of me like something freed. "No, Sophie, I'm going to cook with butter and garlic like a normal person." I called Rachel next. She screamed so loudly I had to hold the phone away from my ear, and then she apologized, and then she screamed again. The prize distribution was processed through Patricia's office and Thomas's trust structure over the following 6 weeks. $54 million minus taxes already withheld moved into accounts with my name on them. My name, only my name. With the clean, quiet efficiency of things that are finally going right. I paid Patricia Howe first, then I paid the taxes. Then I transferred a portion to Sophie's student loan account without telling her in advance and received a phone call at 11 p.m. from a crying 22-year-old who had just checked her balance. I put the phone on speaker and let her talk for 40 minutes straight. Then I drove, alone, to the BP station on Morse Road, and I filled up my tank. A full tank, not the usual $15, and I went inside and bought myself a coffee. The same fluorescent lights, the same rack of chips and candy by the door, the same small, ordinary American convenience store where, 2 years and 3 months earlier, I had reached into my purse on a whim and changed everything. I stood in the parking lot with my coffee and looked at the street. Tuesday evening rush hour, the world having no idea, the world getting on with itself. I got back in my car and drove home. I bought the house in March, a craftsman bungalow in Bexley, on a street with old oak trees, 4 bedrooms, a kitchen with windows on 2 walls, no cigarette smell, just wood and plaster and possibility. Sophie came over the first weekend with Marcus and wine, and we ate takeout on the floor because the furniture hadn't arrived. I watched my daughter laugh in a house that was mine and understood. I wasn't rebuilding the old life. I was building something new. The Karen Miller Foundation launched in May, funding 23 Ohio schools with new books, and in 3 cases a librarian's salary budget cuts had eliminated. I sat in those libraries and was glad, simply, completely glad. I left Hartwell Elementary that spring. One child's card read, in green crayon, "You're the best." It went on the refrigerator. I traveled, Portugal, Japan, came home each time fuller than I'd left. Derek's finances collapsed. The house went to short sale. He took a second job at a mattress warehouse. Claudia received a formal censure and a 2-year federal court suspension. 18 months after the ruling, I was in my Bexley kitchen, the radio on. A song I had loved when I was young. I found myself dancing, just my shoulders, while I stirred the sauce. There it is. There is the life, built with stubbornness and the refusal to become smaller than I actually was.